And the shapes of the tank is quite unique, and you know, based on my experience in the past with speaking to a lot of your test riders, this forms quite a crucial part of ergonomics. And there's only one person in particular that I'd like to maybe discuss this with, and that would be nobody else than Jeremy McWilliams. I really thought it valuable to bring a rider's perspective into what some of these technical features mean and how they translate for everyday use. Jeremy, how important is it for us to focus on ergonomics on a motorcycle, and what does this actually mean for a rider who would potentially spend the full day in the saddle?
Well, exactly that. You know, as test riders, we do spend entire days, day on day, in the saddle, and we obviously realize quite quickly what fits and what doesn't, what's comfortable, what's not comfortable. And you know, we have to go between full fuel tanks when we're testing for long distances. The rider ergo triangle is the most important thing. You know, the connection between foot pegs to seat and legs and contact points, making sure that there's nothing that has a high contact point between all the inside of your legs, all the way down to the foot pegs, to the width of the handlebars, the position of the handlebar. And of course, I get asked many times, well, how does that work for a tall rider and a small rider? Well, actually, this motorcycle has to work for both, because as you well know, we have riders, you know, your height right up to our board of directors that are much, much taller.
But another super crucial element to the motorcycle is, of course, suspension, which I think you guys spend a long time and many hours in trying to fine-tune. And maybe take us through, on the GT specifically, what type of suspension, let's start with the suspension modes. What type of suspension modes would we have available to the rider?
Let's start with auto standard. It is what it says. It's that 830 millimeter seat height. If we go to auto low, it's about 25% different on auto low as it is in comfort. Same if we go to auto high. It also, you know, we've talked about ergo and the standover position on this bike. So for smaller riders, you know, we find that they can actually touch the ground quite easily in auto standard, but if you so wish, you can lower that by 20 to 25%. Of course, then we delve into all of the additional modes that we have carried over from the Super Duke Evo, whereby with our new semi-active suspension technology, we can give the rider every option that he wants. And I think in simple terms, when we ride in comfort, this is the most comfortable setting, I think, that we all agree that we've ever had on any one of our motorcycles, and it has to be because it's for a touring motorcycle. Of course, you can go to the opposite end of the scale and have it for track, like we had on track here through the video shooting, where we can set track setting and then we can individualize that. So the track setting would be our lead test riders' preferred track setting, as it would be for street, as it would be for comfort. Then if we want to go a little bit deeper, we've got pro settings and we've got favorites. We've got every screen we can store as a favorite, a particular setting that you might prefer at any given track or any given road. The other side of the suspension that we found very useful during testing was that we can go into our pro settings and add or subtract compression and rebound. We have everything in the rear shock that we can add as much compression as you would like, up to maximum, right down to minimum. Same with rebound, same with the front fork, compression and rebound, high-speed compression also. And one other thing that we added in was anti-dive, so we can add in anti-dive, and I can talk a little bit more about that if you want, and the reason why we wanted it.
I think one of the biggest questions that we get asked quite often is we can add preload to the rear, but we cannot add preload to the front. However, it kind of offsets itself with this anti-dive function that you've got in some, let's say, small way. But maybe take us through the anti-dive, and why would we put an anti-dive on a motorcycle like this?
So anti-dive basically stops the travel of the motorcycle forward, so it reduces this dive to the front, obviously. And where we really found it useful was with pillion riding. So to stop the pillion pushing onto your back, particularly when we were touring in the Austrian Alps downhill, we found that anti-dive was way more comfortable on than it was off. But we've kept it in so it doesn't make the front of the fork overly stiff. In the past, you know, I noticed that sometimes we could trigger ABS a little bit quicker with anti-dive on, and we've reduced that so that absolutely we don't notice any difference with the anti-dive on and anti-dive off in terms of heavy braking over a particularly bad surface. So this anti-dive is, let's say, a lot more rider-friendly than we've had in the past. Sometimes if you want a little bit less dive for very sporty riding, for instance, anti-dive on's a good thing, or for pillion riding up and down hills, that's where it really comes into its own.
Specific to the GT, this is the first time we see this chassis fitted to this motorcycle, because in the past, the GT was always 2 generations behind as opposed to the Super Duke. And this is the first time it sees, let's say, the most current chassis. How would a chassis like this give a benefit or feedback to a rider? What would they experience?
This carryover chassis from the Super Duke was, I think, all important because it changed its character quite significantly whenever you're comparing to our older GT model. And I mean, in a way that was much more positive. The feedback that we got from all of our riders that first rode this before we even delved into suspension and finding those little niche products, you know, or parts that we've added to it. I think everybody agreed the first time they rode it that, wow, this chassis really works for this once we put this ergo in it. You know, for me, being the lead test rider on this motorcycle, I can't speak highly enough about it because I really prefer to ride this at the moment over anything else because it offers me every optional extra that I've never had at my fingertips before. So the chassis works incredibly well with it. The new suspension technology is by far ahead of anything we've ever had before. And you know, the range that it gives us is much wider than we've ever had before. So everything from somebody who wants to, you know, just poodle along on a very uncomfortable road to taking this bike to the track, it's so versatile now. And I think a lot of that comes from using this DNA in this chassis. And of course, all of the geometry that we found that works so well with the Super Duke.
Something that also has been working well for quite a long time is the power plant, or power pack as we call it internally, the engine. How would this engine or the owner of this motorcycle in the future enjoy this power plant?
Well, you can tell by the smile on my face, I guess, but that was the most fun part, was introducing this engine to the GT. And I have to say that it's an incredible motor. You know, of course, you can ride this motorcycle in whatever way you want to, from the very sedate type riding to a much more sportier type approach, if you so wish. And I guess that would be, you know, my way of riding. But also during the development of this motorcycle, we had to take into consideration every level of rider and how they might approach this platform and what might make them want to ride a GT. I guess the biggest thing to me is cam shift and what that brings to the party, because it gives that feeling of an incredible performance to the rider if he so wants to experience that. And I think that's what we've got with the 1390 and the cam shift is now that it encompasses all of those things that you want in a motorcycle. And riding around the track here, which I never thought I would even consider riding a GT on a track, but we see a lot of our customers do. They take it onto the track, and why not give them every optional extra to use it on the track? And that's kind of what the 1390 is all about. You put it on the track like we do with the Super Duke. This bike is still absolutely as capable as the Super Duke is, which makes it a lot of fun.
Under the bare bones is, of course, the true DNA of what a Super Duke R really is. You know, we've seen publications all around the world refer to the Super Duke as the torque beast, and of course this is referred to as the long distance beast, which is really testament to what it is. But with all of that power, you need to stop the motorcycle somehow. And of course, quite a big step forward from the previous generation Super Duke GT with the Brembo M50 setup on it. But not only that, we've changed to the dilemmas, but we've also given the riders some options with the MCS master cylinder now. Maybe take us through, we talk about 3 ratios, 19, 20 and 21. When they choose their ratio, what would this actually mean for a rider?
So easy. Every rider has got his preference on how direct he wants the response of the brake to be. So the 3 ratios are in there for that reason. And I guess, the rider who is used to those very, very high level stopping, brakes like Brembo dilemmas that we're using at the moment, would choose to go to the strongest, the number being 21, I think, in this case. And somebody who doesn't want to have that initial bite just as strong for riding on the street can choose one of the other 2 options.
Sticking into all the stopping power, also connected to the road, are the new tire options or choice that we've gone with. You mentioned a story which I'd like you to explain to the audience is how and what goes into deciding what tires fitted to a motorcycle, and how does that process start?
How long have we got? It takes some time to go through all the options that we have. The tire that we put on this motorcycle has to have such a wide range of working in cold temperatures up to very wet, flooded road conditions, stopping distances in the wet, acceleration distance or acceleration with less traction cutting is important, but also really importantly for us is got to be so comfortable. So there's a lot of comfort aspects that we look for in the tire, and then also we have to check it for high-speed stability by loading it with 2 people and full of luggage, and then inputting some very strange movements to make sure that we have a completely stable tire in all scenarios. So at the end of the day, yes, we want to have performance. We look for performance as well, something that at least somebody who wants to ride sportily will have a lot of trust in the tire. And that's what we got with, and you've mentioned Power 6s, and I'm very, very happy with the performance of them, because we've been riding on the street all the way through the testing of this motorcycle in all kinds of conditions. And one of the other important features is that it's got longevity. It's got a lot of distance in the tire. So there's tons of things. We don't want self-steering. We don't want the bite to drop in. When the tire wears a little bit, we don't want to feel that there's a step in it. So there's a lot of those considerations that we have to take into account, and I think we got the best.
I think one of the benefits was also losing 1.5 kilograms of weight, somewhat saving a little bit of weight. We still need to control the motor that is known as the Beast. Let's dive into a little bit of the ride modes and some of the functions in these ride modes. Anti-wheelie, just like the Super Duke R, we introduced the 5-level anti-wheelie. This has the same setup?
Same setup exactly, Gareth, because it's a safety feature. It's there because we have got such a high torque number, and if somebody decides to run it on track throttle, reducing all of the rider aids sufficiently, then of course the advice would be use anti-wheelie mode. And anti-wheelie mode basically uses 5 different levels, from low, very low to low, medium, high and very high, where it's got a non-flip over function to stop the rider from getting too high during wheelie, which it's a lovely addition. It's something that I use also on street, and the reason why I use it is because if I'm riding on a sporty back road, I want to keep both wheels in contact. If I'm riding on track for my fastest lap time, I might use low or very low. And again, just allowing a little bit of wheelie, a little bit like the technology that we use in MotoGP. The motorcycles are using exactly the same technology, only allowing so much wheelie. Same with the traction control. When you buy the track pack, it's obviously from 10 right down to 0 and all on the fly right now. So as we go through all of those settings, we can reduce the traction control right to off if we want to, when we keep going on the on our toggle buttons on the left-hand bar.
One thing I love about the toggle switches on the left handlebar, obviously they're configurable as we've spoken about earlier, but there's no long press to turn the stuff off anymore. Once you go through the traction control and you get to 1 and you press down to 0, it's a single press and it goes to 0. You can also do this while on the move, which is really important, because the last thing you need to do is to stop to change something. I think this is also why on the electronics side we've got a couple of options of how to change your riding mode. So we have on the left-hand handlebar, we've got a toggle switch. Also on the dashboard, preferably while standing still, it's easier to press the dashboard and you'll be able to go into changing your riding mode. Then of course on the right switch cube, we now have introduced a brand new mode switch. So the mode switch allows you to quick access in one press, get to the mode you need, flick through the options and set it while on the move. So the only thing you would have to do is close the throttle, but this would also help.
Yeah, what I do is I set my favorites up and then access it through the mode button. So dead simple.
Another cool feature that we discussed with Wolfgang earlier was the addition of Sport ABS. What would the difference be between Supermoto ABS and Supermoto Plus ABS, and also the addition of Sport ABS and Street ABS? You know, you have 4 options available for a rider, and in what case would somebody use which ABS setting?
Well, that easy. I mean, street ABS speaks for itself. It has to be absolutely as safe as it possibly can be, keeping both wheels firmly planted on the street when emergency braking. But what we found is that the street ABS doesn't necessarily lend itself so well if we want to take it onto a track. Our test riders felt that we needed some lift up in some situations so that we didn't have the intervention of ABS happening too much on a fast approach to a very, very, very short hairpin, for instance. And the addition of Sport ABS enables the rider now to have some lift up from the rear wheel, and we have some cut when it gets a little bit higher. But the lovely part about it is that it incorporates lean angle dependent ABS. So if you're taking Supermoto and Supermoto Plus, none of those modes have got lean angle dependent ABS. So the Sport ABS kind of explains what it is. It's for riding very sportily, also with some lift up, even at the smaller lean angle. So up to 20 degrees lean angle, we also allow a little bit of rear lift up. And it works very, very well if you want to ride very aggressively on a racetrack somewhere. Supermoto Plus is quite a nice feature as well, because you get that little bit of rear slide up to 7 degrees or so if you so want. So that's more for that. Let's call him a very experienced rider that knows how to do that.
For 2024 Super Duke R and Super Duke R Evo, we introduced an adjustable engine braking technology feature to the motorcycle, and there's no difference when it comes to the new GT. But why would we go and add an option to adjust engine braking?
That's a really good question. You know, we've always used our standard engine brake mode from our engine guys with this motorcycle. Well, we found that when we were cruising for long distances, as we were testing with this motorcycle, that we thought that less engine braking might work well in terms of when we're just touring. We asked, could we have 2 settings less than standard so that we could reduce it a little bit, so that we didn't have such an influence from closed throttle. So it means that we don't have to balance the throttle absolutely perfectly. Of course, we could just go into cruise control, but for the rider that prefers to have that connection to his throttle, we reduced a little bit of that engine braking just so that cruising was easier and it wasn't such a reduction in speed on motorway riding or whatever that might be. Why did we add 2 modes? So we have stronger as well. The reason being is that we find that in some cases we actually prefer a little bit more engine braking, riding very sportily or on the track, downhill riding. It's a nice thing to add for 2 people on and toggle between +1 and +2 more engine braking. So it's just more features for the customer you know, so that he's got every option at his fingertips. As you say, now it's also on our toggle switch, like it would be with our traction control settings. I think there's about 4 options you can add on the toggle now. But yeah, that was a big added feature for us that we all agreed enhanced the ride.
And this is something super easy found on the dashboard. Everything is available through pictogram, so everything is in a picture. The engine braking is also one of our pictograms that is focused on the dashboard. So when changing your engine braking, at one quick glance, you know exactly where you're at with your engine braking. This brings us to the end of our video in terms of the deep dive into the all-new KTM 1390 Super Duke GT.